Lovely, lovely. Welcome, everybody, to this knowledge sharing session on emergency preparedness. I just had a couple of technical difficulties, but we'll work around it. Today, we are planning around and discussing the topic of extreme heat. It's organized by the MNBC Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, and Food Security. My name is Moza, and I'm calling from these beautiful, luscious lands of the Musqueam and Coast Salish people. The role that I play is I'm the research and data specialist within our ministry, and I get to work very closely with the Métis harvesters across BC. I'm also very lucky to work with our captains of the hunt. We've got 7 captains of the hunt currently that make up BC Manor. I think we have a picture of all these wonderful captains. There they are. So historically, the captains of the hunt were trusted leaders as part of the Métis governance structure. They were trusted leaders who made decisions for their communities, and our captains today are not too different from that. They're all appointed by their local regions. So just a little bit of housekeeping here. This session is held in a meeting format, which means if our cameras are on, we can see each other. If our mics are on, we can hear each other. The session is recorded for those who aren't able to participate today. Please feel free to ask any questions during the presentations. We've got 3 presenters ahead. So the chat line is also moderated by our wonderful team members. So if you choose to ask a question there, she will bring it to our attention. At the end of this session, we've got polls and questions and answers. It's actually my favorite part because we get to gather everyone's thoughts, we identify gaps in knowledge, and we also learn quite a bit from each other's experiences. At the very end, we'll talk about our next webinar, which will be on June 13th. And we typically end perfectly on time at 6:30 p.m. if you need to plan for that. And we can talk a little bit about what upcoming webinars we have. There's a couple of slides. There we go. So on June 13th, we're discussing mental health and climate change. In July, we're discussing water scarcity. We're taking a little break in August. We're back in September talking about earthquakes. In October, we'll prepare for the winter season by discussing cold weather events. And just to continue the path of emergency management through all the communities, we'll start discussing career paths in emergency management. Without further ado, here is Drew Stewart.
Tanshe Kiawao, Drew Stewart, Dishinakashon, Kemkemaleo Oshinia. So I'm just saying hello, how are you? My name's Drew Stewart. I come from Kamkamale. That's where I'm right now. So that's what Squamish referred to as Vancouver. The Kamkamale Canucks won a big game last night, so it was quite exciting. Yeah, I'm calling in from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations in Vancouver. And I said this before, and I say it again, it's a real honor to be a Métis citizen living on the lands of these 3 nations, and a real honor to have raised a family here. I feel blessed and very, very lucky to have done that. I want to thank you all for coming out on a very beautiful day. I was in another meeting, and they're talking about, and you know, I work as the manager of climate change policies and programs at MNBC. And when you start talking in these things about climate change, as soon as the sun comes out, everyone starts getting very nervous. But you know, the reality is, I think it's just a nice day. So just enjoy it. We're all going to be okay. So yeah. On the other side, I just wanted to tell you about this website banner that does come up during times of emergency. So if you come to MNBC's website, it directs you to various resources. Some of them are external to us, and some of them are internal. So some of them are there for Métis citizens and those who identify as Métis as well. So yeah, and that pops up right across the front page. So please use this as a resource during these times. So without any further ado, I'm going to tell you who's here today. So we'll start with Amy, who introduced herself already in perfect mischief. Amy Lubik is from Fraser Health Population and Public Health. She's the Climate Change and Planetary Health Lead for Fraser Health Population and Public Health, PPH. In this role, she provides strategic leadership, knowledge translation, and subject matter expertise on issues relating to climate change and health, and supports implementation and health adaptation initiatives with a focus on equity and social justice. She's particularly passionate about supporting community resilience through connections and partnerships with non-governmental organizations, community groups, and local governments. And that last section, she is very passionate about it. I have many touch points with Amy, and I'm really happy that she can be here. This is her third webinar today on heat and extreme heat. So without any further ado, Amy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Drew. I'm very happy to be here today with everybody. I'm just going to try to share my screen. This has not always gone great for me today. So let's see how it goes right now. How's that working?
Good to go.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start with a little introduction on smoke and heat readiness, health impacts mainly, and what we can do. And I just want to begin by acknowledging that Fraser Health does provide care on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish and Nlaka'pamux nations, and is home to 6 Métis charter communities. I myself live in the core territories of the Tsleil-Waututh and Coquitlam nations, and shared territory of many others. And I always just like to acknowledge that often in literature we hear Indigenous folks are more vulnerable to climate change, and really I think it's important to acknowledge that there's so much wisdom and resilience and so much that we can learn from Indigenous peoples and traditional ways of knowing. And most of those vulnerabilities are actually what's been put on by the colonial systems and that separation from land and from community. So I'm going to start by giving a quick rundown of the BC Heat Alert and Response System. I don't know how many folks have heard about this, but this is the, I think, 3rd year we've had it. It was developed in response to the heat dome, which we all experienced. And this is a really good time. I really appreciate everyone putting this on because this year's potentially a kind of perfect storm of drought, potential for fires, and heat. We know that we have, over 100 fires burning right now, so that's pretty dangerous. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but BC, we tend to think that we're a bit more temperate as a province than the rest of the country, but BC is not really prepared for heat. We're built more to keep heat in than to keep people cool, and we don't have a lot of plans. And also in BC, our temperatures, other than in the interior, tend to ramp up really quickly from being cool and comfortable to really hot. And it's that change in temperature before people have a chance to acclimatize that really puts us in danger. So the BC Heat Alert and Response System, or BC-HARS, has been put in place. It's a public alert system. And the province is going to call a heat alert or a heat warning when temperatures reach a certain, and it's different in every kind of geographical region of BC, there's about 5, but when temperatures reach what's associated for 2 days with what's associated with about a 5% increase in mortality. And it's not just the absolute temperature that's important. So where I live, it's 29 degrees. But it's 29 degrees for 2 days and not dropping below 16 degrees at night. And that's really important because if it drops really low at night, then our bodies have that chance to cool off and to reset. And if it doesn't drop at night, then our bodies don't. And that's when we get into those really dangerous temperatures. And so that's a heat warning. And an extreme heat emergency, which is what we had during the heat dome, is when those kind of temperatures are met, but the temperatures will increase day over day for 3 days or more. And that becomes really dangerous, and it's associated with about a 20% increase in mortality. So you can find out more information about this on the Fraser Health website, on the BC CDC website. But really, it's important to sign up for heat alerts. So if you download on your phone, whether the WeatherCan app, this will send those alerts to your phone. There's emails through Environment and Climate Change Canada you can sign up for. And also just watching the news and those type of things will come out to the public. So you don't have to memorize all the temperature drops and falls, but do pay attention for them. And there are particular responses that are attached to these warning systems. So when a heat warning is called, then the health authorities start checking in on people, and non-governmental organizations will start deploying, more water and things like that. So we all start taking action to work together when these type of emergencies are called. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that. I know it's kind of complicated. So when we talk about who's most at risk, we're talking about a combination of physical, social, and environmental risks. Everybody's at risk, and it's really important that we all know the signs of both heat exhaustion, which is a little bit less dangerous, and heat stroke, which is something where we need to call 911. So we do have posters and information through Fraser Health to help people identify those symptoms of heat illness, but it's not always the overheating that's dangerous. For a lot of these groups that I'm going to talk about, it's actually pre-existing conditions that put people at risk, and the heat will make people more vulnerable, kind of push those conditions into overdrive. And so seniors are a particularly vulnerable part of the population. And this is partly because as we age, our bodies start to lose their ability to regulate their internal heating and cooling processes. And it can also be harder for older people to notice if they are overheating or if they're dehydrating. Older people are also more likely to have chronic illnesses such as heart disease or lung disease or kidney disease. And when the body's already working hard to keep those systems going, it can be dangerous to put that extra pressure of pumping more blood to keep us cool or taking in more air or dehydration when it comes to the kidneys. So Fraser Health has developed this primer for taking care of elders or people with more chronic conditions during the heat. And I have provided a QR code, but I'm happy to share the slides out also after the presentation. And some of the things that we do recommend is getting people to drink more water, monitoring more the temperature inside of your home. Again, I'll talk more about dangerous and safe temperatures, but really once the temperatures get hot inside, there's a lot of things that we need to do to take action. And when people do start overheating, if they don't have air conditioning, one of the best ways to cool them down is submerging cool showers or cool baths, submerging as much as our bodies as we can in cool water. And that really helps that heat from inside our bodies dissipate. So medications can also put people at risk. So some medications make it easier for people to overheat. Some make it more easy for them to dehydrate, and some can make it harder for them to sense if they're getting dehydrated or overheating. And some classes to be aware of are things like beta blockers, some diabetes medications, laxatives or diuretics, and some antipsychotics, as well as some antidepressants. It's important for people to talk to their doctor or their pharmacist about what medications that they're on and whether or not that might cause a problem in the heat. So this is a poster that's available through our website and the BC government website, just to help people think about who should take action and talk to their doctors or pharmacists. It's really important to remember to keep taking your medication, but just be sure that when you are, there may be other precautions that you need to take. Sometimes it's drinking more water, sometimes it's not, depending on your medical conditions. And sometimes it's just making sure that you know who to call if you're in trouble or where to go to keep cool. And we're seeing more evidence of vulnerability for those experiencing mental illness, especially schizophrenia. And this is really important. In the 2021 heat dome, we actually saw 8 to 13% of excess deaths in people who are experiencing schizophrenia. That's really high considering only about 0.78% of the population actually have that illness. And part of this can be because people who live with schizophrenia, especially if they're having an episode, may not be aware of the reality of what's going on, may not be able to sense the heat. They might actually think they're cold and be wanting to put on more sweaters. Also, some of the medications that they may take may put them more at risk. And if you're living with a mental health condition, it can be hard to have a stable income or a really safe, stable housing situation. And that's kind of the perfect storm of vulnerability. So it's important to have care plans for people who have schizophrenia. And that goes for anyone who has a mental health challenge. Again, there may be drugs that put people more at risk. There may be someone who uses substance may be more at risk. Again, some of those substances may make people more vulnerable. And also, heat is associated with an increase in more suicidal thoughts. So if there are people that are dealing with those challenges, heat can be kind of a scary situation. There are a number of resources to help people that are dealing with these conditions. And I always recommend Towards the Heart, which is a partnership with BC CDC. And they also talk about cooling kits that can be given to people who are experiencing challenges. And in 2022, we saw an increase in younger people coming to emergency for heat illness. That made us feel kind of, not the younger people coming to the hospital made us feel better, but not seeing as many elders as we did in 2021 was a happy change. But the suggestion of seeing more younger people coming was that maybe it was more outdoor workers and people who may be exercising in the heat. So we do know people who work outside can be more vulnerable. In some cases, it is more marginalized workers, and potentially they may not know the risks, or they may be working in conditions where they're not feeling that safe to disobey the orders of what they're supposed to be, what they're told to do. So we did develop a guidance for outdoor workers, and WorkSafe also has some guidance for employers. And we've also learned that food establishment workers have struggled a lot in the heat in restaurants. And so Vancouver Coastal has provided some guidance for restaurants, staff, and employers during the heat. I don't think I linked that here, but I think it's a wonderful document. And so moving on to social vulnerability, this is a graph from the 2021 heat dome, and you can see that the majority of the folks that we lost were elders. And those are the numbers in blue, especially people, older elders. But in green, we actually saw that the people that we would tend to think are most vulnerable, people in acute care or people in residential care, there was a protective factor as they were connected to the healthcare system, and there's a lot of people checking in on them. Well, the majority of people we lost were people in community, so people who didn't have consistent access to the healthcare system or connections. And a lot of those folks were people who were socially isolated, lower income, or living with disabilities. And that's why it's so important. Like the organization that I work with, we're really trying to work more with community organizations because those are the trusted partners who may have contacts with these folks. And we're also starting to try to get more people to do heat check-ins with their loved ones, with their neighbors. And so home visitations, either by phone or by in person, is really important. I've linked here the National Collaborating Center for Environmental Health. So they talk about how to identify who is more vulnerable, what you should ask them, how to do temperature checks, and when to take action. So if you know the person has been in a place that's over 31 degrees for a long period of time, it's time to try to get them to go to a library or community center, even a cool shaded spot where they can help cool down. or go to stay with a loved one, stay with a neighbor if they can. There's also a check-in guide that's been developed for community organizations, and that's been developed by Vancouver Coastal Health. And as well today, I learned that the Hey Neighbor Collaborative, if anyone's heard of them, has a guide on how to organize your building for heat check-ins. So if you live in an apartment, that can be really helpful. And anything that we can do to look out for those neighbors and loved ones who might be more vulnerable and who might not know it is really important. And this, I think, is one of the most important slides that I'm going to walk you through. It's really important to emphasize that people don't die because it's hot outside. They tend to die because it's hot inside. And usually and so this graph is from the National Collaborating Center for Environmental Health. And they looked at the temperatures of 2 different homes in Abbotsford during the 2021 heat dome. And so one of them was air conditioned. You can see that blue line, and it stays at a safe temperature the whole time. The red line is from a house, the temperatures in a house that did not have air conditioning, and the black line is from temperatures outside. So you can see as the outdoors temperature starts getting very high, the indoor temperature of the not air-conditioned house doesn't quite reach the outdoor temperature, but it never actually cools down nearly as much as the outdoor temperature does. So during the course of these 4 or 5 days of heat, the indoor temperature just keeps rising steadily and keeping that heat in. And past the red band, you can see there. So this is between 26 and 31 degrees. And this is starting to get into what we can kind of consider the danger zone. So under 26 degrees is considered safe for everybody, but over 26 degrees and up to 31, you're starting to get into a danger zone for folks who are more vulnerable. And then after that, it's really important to try to leave the space. So you can see that the temperature does go down a little bit at night, but really not very much and not into that safe zone, especially over those couple of days. And you'll notice that the peak indoor temperatures and the peak outdoor temperatures don't actually line up. So it's actually hottest in the evening at the house around 8 p.m., which can be surprising to most folks when you think it's going to cool down. So we actually recommend that people keep all of their windows closed from the early morning, windows closed with blinds closed or shutters or whatever it is that you have, trying to keep that outdoor heat out and as much cool inside as you can. And then when it gets cooler outside, that's when we can start opening the windows. And I'll talk about fans in a bit, but use a fan to help bring cool air in to the home is really important. We have been advocating to cooling centers to try to stay open later at night because people's homes are going to be hot that later at night. And if you can stay at a library or a friend's house longer, even in a park, is really important. And I did talk a little bit about, keeping those blinds closed. But air conditioning heat pumps really are the most effective thing. It's also important to just recognize that that can be really expensive. So that is definitely a barrier. And we're doing a lot of advocacy right now on the right to keep cool and what can be done on a landlord level, building level, even a provincial level, to make sure people have access to cool spaces. If you live in a house, staying in a basement, if you live in an apartment, advocating for a common space to be used as a cool space. We have been writing to landlords and stratas to try to get them to do things like that as well. And I did mention already using fans to move cool air in or push hot air out. And I did mention before that air conditioning is the best mitigation for extreme heat. However, it is really expensive. And so last year, the province of BC actually started this BC Hydro free air conditioning program. There is a way to refer people to the program through healthcare providers, particularly home health. But you can find on their website, there's a low income stream. And so there are low income cutoffs for people to be able to access this free air conditioning program. It's a little harder, just a little bit harder if you have a landlord. because you do need landlord permission to do this. But BC Hydro does have like a Q&A on their website, so it can help make that argument to a landlord. And both Vancouver Coastal and Fraser Health have recommendations for landlords and strata managers around this program, well, around cooling in general. But we are advocating for this program and why, from a health point of view, it's really important to let people take part. And I talked about fans a little bit, but there's new research that shows that fans do not directly cool the air. So fans don't directly cool people. They can feel kind of nice and they can actually give you kind of a false sense of cooling as that air is moving. But really, what we're trying to get people to do is use that to cool spaces. So again, pulling that cool air in or pushing hot air out, but not using it as a way to cool yourself. Because our bodies do really keep that heat inside, and it's that your core body temperature that we're really concerned about. And so it really is important that, especially if temperatures get over 35 degrees, now you're blowing really hot air back on yourself, and that can actually make it more dangerous for people. And so there is a fan FAQ on our website and an infographic in a lot of different languages, if that's helpful for people to share. And I'm not going to go into window falls, but I think it's important to mention we do put screens on our windows, but that's to keep bugs out, not kids in. And so we do see a lot of window falls from children in the summer. And so we do have some guidance on what to do to just make sure that kids are safe with locks on the windows and keeping furniture away from the windows so that everyone is safe in the heat. And that's it from me. But if you have any other questions, I'm looking forward to answering them. And I've left our emails there, and I can also, like I said, share the PowerPoint around. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Really appreciate that. That's awesome. I do have a question for you before I open it up to anybody else who has questions. And my question is, in terms of monitoring the temperature inside, how do you recommend doing that? Like practically, what should we be doing?
Honestly, practically, it's have yep, Magda's demonstrating. Have a thermometer in your home in a place that's really easy to see. You can look at your thermostat. Not everybody has a thermostat, so those thermometers are really important, and they're really quite cheap.
Right. And then in terms of the numbers we should be worried about when, could you repeat those again? So we're monitoring if it doesn't go below a certain amount at night and however long during the day. Yep.
So the safe temperature for everybody is below 26 degrees. And then as we go from between 26 and 31, that's kind of the time when we want to be monitoring those folks who are more susceptible. Nobody feels great at that time, but like there are people where it's much more dangerous. And then over 31 degrees is when we want to start thinking about moving to another place. There's not really like a set time for how long, but your house is going to maintain that temperature for quite a while. So those are the temperatures to keep in mind.
That's great. I want to ask if anybody who's in the webinar, if they have ever, purposely done heat check-ins with their loved ones or other people in their neighborhood that they feel vulnerable with. And if anybody else has some questions for Amy, please, yeah.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the presentation. My partner and I are happy to join. And we were just talking about with elders, for some of them, air conditioning is a cost and they're on fixed income. And so he was having to check in with his mom frequently and remind her to use her AC because she was really reluctant to use the extra power and have to pay for it. And that's a real concern for a lot of seniors, right?
Yeah, that is.
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, Drew.
No, I was saying, could you speak to that a little bit more, Amy?
Oh, I mean, I can more just empathize
Yeah.
with it. I think we have been doing some advocacy toward that and it's energy poverty. So during the winter, we hear more about it, people not wanting to turn on their heat because of the cost, and now we're hearing it more in the summer. There are some rent banks in some communities that support. It's like usually it's kind of a one-time no interest loan. Um, but a lot of rent banks are actually kind of overprescribed now, and I don't know that they do it for summer. I know they do it for winter. But it's your electricity, either your electricity bill or your rent that they'll support. For the BC Hydro program, the units that they're giving out are pretty low wattage, so it's not that much more per month, especially if you're just using it during the heat peaks. But again, like you mentioned, it's hard to kind of figure out when to use that because you don't want to be overly hot, but you also, if you're on a fixed income, you're also trying to save your money. So it's a bit of a balancing act. But again, when we get those heat alerts, it's really important to turn it on. But like I said, I'll empathize because there's not an easy answer to that. But we will keep advocating for that energy poverty piece.
Oh,
Sorry, it just reminded me, a friend of mine talked about there might be like an app that I haven't tried this myself, but he was looking for an app to install on his dad's phone so that it could read the temperature in his dad's house so that he could monitor that. I'm not familiar with what that app is, so I hope that it is actually a thing. But he was trying to find something like that because his dad didn't want to bother him. And he's just like, but I want to know you're safe.
That's interesting. Yeah. Amanda.
I think the shocking piece is 26 degrees and below is the huge piece, and especially with our elders, they don't thermal regulate as well anymore, which is unfortunate. And they're certainly vulnerable, and we need to watch out for them. In my case, my brother's neighbors are in their 80s, and we love them like our own grandparents, and we're constantly checking in and trying to offer them reprieve coming over here that they have air conditioning, and they continue to decline. The wife is definitely eager to participate. So what we've had to do is we've had to go in and take a look at their home, and we've moved their air conditioning unit from one room to another so that we can give them a place of shelter that is better. And unfortunately, I'm from the front line. I've worked through the heat dome. I've seen the unfortunate impacts. It's absolutely a, a tragedy, and it's something that we can prevent by checking in on our neighbors and our elders. And I think that's where it's really community, even if we're not with other Indigenous peoples, but our fellow neighbors. That's where we can make a real impact of just doing good for our neighbors is such a huge thing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Amanda. Pixie.
Hi, everybody. Let me turn my camera on as well, just so that you can actually see me and know that I'm actually here and actually talking to you. I don't know if you guys can see me now, but yeah, for me, I think I've done quite a few health checks on some of my elders, my family. My sister lives with a disability as well. So yeah, it's like keeping an eye on them, but also, reminding them to shut their air conditioner off once in a while and not turning it right back on right away, making sure that they allow it to defrost, because sometimes what happens with my elderly parents is they shut it off and then they turn it right back on again. Well, then it's just blowing hot air. It's actually not doing what it's supposed to do because everything is froze up inside, because that's what happens. So I think there needs to be a little bit of education on, how to effectively utilize some of those tools. I don't think everybody knows how. And I only know this from making chocolate and understanding that sometimes when they run for long periods of time, they actually can freeze up and then they become warming units, not actually cooling units. So again, and then, reminding them maybe just to get a wet towel and just wrapping it around the back of their necks, or finding some of those new age cooling jelly things or cooling vests. Now you can actually buy these things, right? So helping our elders understand that there is other ways, or even some of our people that have complex challenges or challenges in general. There is ways to stay cool. We just have to think outside the box, and it doesn't always have to be an air conditioner. My granny, that's all she ever used was closing the curtains, and she had fans, and she used to get ice cream buckets back in the day, and she'd fill them up with water, and she'd put them in front of the fan, and we'd sit there as kids like, oh yeah, it was the most wonderful thing in the world, right? So again, there is other ways. It doesn't always necessarily mean that we have to plug something in. I think we need to think outside the box and think about, how do we, how do we use some of that cold air that's coming from deep down dark in the, in our undercellars and all of those things, and utilize those as well in our homes, rather than just thinking the first thing that we need to do is plug something in.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Pixie. That's awesome.
I think the only one that I could probably add is that having a bucket of cool water to stick your feet into, if you're getting really hot, or like cool showers, things like that. I mean, then you go back into the hot, and you need to do it frequently, but that's one of the most effective ways of cooling yourself down. But yeah, Pixie got the rest of them, I think.
Moza.
Yeah, I have some lo-fi suggestions. So I was born and raised in the Arabian Gulf, and my family is from the Indian Ocean, the tropics. And so staying cool is a thing that we've always had to do. Lo-fi solution is thinking about what kind of foods we're eating. So eating like cooler water-based foods. I have a little list here: celery, cucumbers, berries are very cooling as well. Coconut water, all of the herbs that typically grow in the summertime, like cilantro, spearmint, dill, rosemary, also very cooling. Lemongrass can be cooling, and also avoiding food that is really heaty. So I think meat, for example, like red meat, requires way more heat to break down, which means the body has to produce more heat internally. So just being conscious of the types of food that we're eating and planning our menus ahead of time too.
I think those are great points. And it just reminded me, honestly, not cooking where possible, like having those kind of foods where you don't have to turn on your oven, whether it's salads or, I don't know, gazpacho type of thing, smoothies, things that can help keep you cool. So those are great suggestions. Thanks.
I'm going to introduce Magda now. Magda Szpala, I hope I said that right correctly, is director of, sorry, what is it? Szpala? Okay, is the Director of Sustainability and Resilience at BC Housing. She's an uninvited settler on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. In her current position as Director of Sustainability and Resilience at BC Housing, Magda is responsible for integrating social and environmental priorities into the organization's activities. Magda was responsible for BC Housing's first carbon neutral action report and led the development of BC Housing's first climate adaptation framework. She's been working on BC Housing's extreme heat response for the last few years. She also supported the Mobilizing Building Adaptation and Resilience MBAR initiative that focuses on resilient building design and renovations. She holds a Bachelor of Science, an honors degree in psychology, a master's degree in strategic leadership towards sustainability. Thank you, Magda. Welcome to MNBC.
Thank you very much, Drew. And thank you, Amy, for that was a very clear presentation and guidance and a great summary from Drew. So I'm going to attempt and share my screen as well. Hope you can see it. I can't see you when I'm presenting, so feel free to just jump in, unmute yourself, and if there's any questions or clarification, feel free to just jump in and interrupt me. So I'd like to first of all acknowledge that at BC Housing, we conduct our activities on the ancestral homelands of hundreds of Indigenous peoples and nations across BC, each with their own unique traditions, cultures, worldviews, languages, and history. And I am at this location on the traditional ancestral unceded homelands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, who have been the caretakers of these lands for thousands of years. And I pay my respects to their peoples past, present, and future. And I also want to recognize that Indigenous worldviews are a lot more aligned with the principles of sustainability than the current capitalistic systems that we have, and recognize that it is often Indigenous communities that are forefront of fighting for environmental protection and also being most affected by the extreme weather events that we're seeing more and more recently. And we do have a lot to learn from Indigenous ways of knowing and being in the world. And one of my biggest learnings have been the difference of how Indigenous people relate to nature and how recognize nature as kin and as a relative. And so I'd like to share a couple of quotes that particularly spoke to me and kind of really emphasized that sort of difference in worldviews. So here is one. In some native languages, the term for plants translates to those who take care of us. And even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. And both quotes are from this book called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And she's a mother and a scientist. She's a botanist and a member of Potawatomi Nation. And this book had a great influence on my worldview. And so I just thought I would share that. I also wanted to acknowledge Curtis Brick. Whenever I'm invited to speak about extreme heat, I'd like to start with acknowledging him. He was an Indigenous man who unfortunately died of heat exposure in Grandview Park in Vancouver in July in 2009. And it was the first publicized case of someone who unfortunately died because of extreme heat. And it really kind of spurred a slew of different actions within the city of Vancouver, but also across the province, including my own organization. So I'll just mention very briefly about who we are, and then I'll focus the core of my presentation on our extreme heat and wildfire smoke response, mainly heat, but I'll touch on wildfire smoke a little bit. Most people know BC Housing as a social housing provider, and that is one of our key mandates. So we develop, manage, and administer affordable housing. We also have a mandate to license residential builders and to provide research and education for the residential construction industry. And we try to synergize on those two mandates. In terms of who we serve, I'm not going to go through this list. I'll let you read it, but also I would love you to correlate this list with the list that Amy presented in terms of who is most vulnerable. And you will probably see that there's a lot of overlap, and a lot of people that we serve are the people who are also most at risk in terms of extreme heat. So in terms of our extreme heat and wildfire smoke response, it has sort of two parts to it. The first one is in terms of emergency response and protecting tenants and clients, sort of in terms of immediate relief and response. And the other is sort of a longer, medium, longer term planning. And that's mostly around building better buildings. So we have made some changes in terms of how we construct new buildings, and we do give cooling and clean air a lot more consideration than we did in the past. And the same applies to when we do a major upgrade and retrofit. We try and install as much cooling as possible. And I also wanted to share a recent development. Not sure how many of you are aware, but how many people on the call are sort of linked to construction industry. But there's been a recent update to the BC Building Code, and it's effective as of March this year. And it is a requirement for cooling of at least one living space per home to not exceed that 26 degrees Celsius that Amy mentioned as a sort of threshold of when things can become dangerous to our health. So that is a great development. It applies to all new buildings, big and small, and I think that will make a big difference for our province. And I wanted to share the photo of this building on the right. That's one of the social housing buildings in Victoria. It's just a great example of external shading and how when we talk about cooling, yes, AC is the most effective, but there's also a lot of things that can be done to support cooling, such as external shading. So now moving to what BC Housing does in terms of protecting tenants and clients. We have an extreme heat and wildfire smoke emergency response plan. It covers our own portfolio of buildings that we own and manage, where we have direct responsibility for our tenants. And I will talk about a few key components of that plan in a moment. We also support nonprofit housing providers in developing their capacity to respond. So that involves providing access to resources. In case of emergency, we do support the nonprofits in terms of providing portable AC units for common spaces and other cooling items. And I'll show you some of those items in a moment as well. And we organize or co-organize educational events, workshops, and webinars. We actually just had a webinar for nonprofit providers yesterday that was recorded and will be posted on the website, and hopefully will serve as a resource. We're collaborating with a lot of external parties, particularly with health authorities and people like Amy and others who are on the health side, as well as Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, municipalities, and community organizations. During the last few years, when we were dealing with hot temperatures, we found that part of the emergency response was also trying to make some changes within our buildings. So all of our buildings, wherever there is a common space, they are being turned into clean air and cooling space. And we were looking for low-tech solutions for reducing the heat load in tenant units. And we have installed window films in quite a number of buildings. So window films, it's just, it's kind of what it sounds. It's a film that's put on the window that does make a window a little bit darker, but it's hardly noticeable if at all. And it prevents, it doesn't prevent the heat coming in, but it does lower the amount of heat that comes in. And we have been experimenting a little bit of external shading in terms of, again, as a sort of emergency measure. That is work in progress. We've only done it, I think, on 1 or 2 buildings. It is one of the most effective ways, but it's also more challenging to do it on existing buildings. It's way easier to do external shading on new construction than it is on an existing building. And we've done a number of engagement activities with our tenants in terms of survey focus groups and community development that I will touch on a little bit in a moment. So in terms of what are the key parts of our emergency response plan, it starts at the end of the summer of the previous year. We do an evaluation of what worked well and what didn't work well. And then at the beginning of each year, around April, and even March, April, we start planning ahead and do staff training, and that includes looking at whether our building managers have the inventories or have the portable AC units installed in the common area, so there's at least one cooling space in the building. That's ensuring that people know what our response protocols are, where to go for information, who to contact in different scenarios, that they have communication materials. You can see on this picture on the right, there is our previous version of Tips to Beat the Heat poster. I'll show you what it looks like now in a moment. So just kind of really getting ready and making sure that everyone is aware of what our plans are and that we are able to provide some access to cooling and clean air for our tenants. Tenant heat wellness checks have been mentioned. We are also doing those and activating when the heat alert or heat warning is issued. I forgot to mention, part of our preparing ahead of summer is identifying who are the most vulnerable people in our buildings. Oftentimes, they are people with disabilities and people with different health conditions and so on. It is a very hard exercise to do, because we know that everyone is at risk of extreme heat, but if we have limited resources, we do prioritize. And this year, for the first time, we actually send out a survey to all of our tenants, asking them if they want to be on our contact list for the heat wellness checks. And I mentioned the partnerships have been key in terms of learning from others and exchanging resources. We also are engaged in supporting nonprofits who are in touch with the unhoused population and people who are experiencing homelessness, in terms of supporting outreach teams, calling kits, pop-up tents, and overall alerts and communication. And then we mentioned resilient neighborhoods. We're actually working with resilient neighborhoods and Shift Collaborative, and had a fantastic experience. And what we're trying to do is to encourage tenants to support one another. So really encourage the social connections, so that in case of emergency, the tenants can rely on one another. And it's been a successful program, although very limited. For now, we're working on 4 sites, but we are hoping to expand to as many sites as possible. And I've put a link to the website on this slide. That they do have great resources that I would encourage everyone to check out. This is just a few photos from one of our community events with building resilient neighborhoods from our site in Victoria. And here again is another shout out to that organization for in terms of the resources that they willingly, openly share. BC Housing also has created a lot of different resources. This is a link to our website. There is a few different buckets of information. We have communication tools, and I mentioned the poster. Here's the poster, the tips to beat the heat poster, and also a leaflet. It's available in a few different languages, and we use it as a poster as well as a card when we do the wellness checks and someone is not home. We do leave a leaflet so that they know someone was trying to connect with them, and the person can follow up and make sure that the connection is made. And just going back to the website, there's information on health impacts of extreme heat and wildfire smoke, how to prepare an emergency response plan to heat, what are different options for cooling space, specific information for tenants, and other communication materials. So lots of resources there, including taking care of our pets. So there's just a snippet of a poster for how to keep pets cool. And that is a picture of my dog. I couldn't resist, but added it on. I mentioned cooling kits. Here's suggestions of some of the items that we've been including in the cooling kits. So it includes a thermometer, a small tote, towel, gel compressed water bottle, spray bottle. We've had great feedback. Our tenants have really appreciated getting those. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Magda. Thank you so much. That was great. Really appreciate that. It's great to know about that new code in March 2024 about, maybe you can talk about it a little bit. So must have at least one living space within a larger house that won't exceed 26 degrees. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that means both for like small single family homes as well as, big towers. If they are residential buildings, each home has to have one space that is, that doesn't exceed the 26 degrees Celsius. So in most cases, it basically means having active cooling, unless the building is, designed in a way that really doesn't overheat, which most buildings, that's very hard to achieve. So it basically means that there's cooling required in at least one area of each home. This is for new construction only.
Right.
Unfortunately, it would not be possible to put similar regulation for existing buildings because that is a lot more challenging. A lot of buildings, don't have the electrical capacity. You really need to look at what systems are already in place. So it is a way more complicated requirement for existing buildings.
Right. Yeah, it does show that that we are entering a new era, and that it's entering in the regulations as we build. And then the cooling kits. Yeah, that's great. Could you throw up the cooling kit slide again?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the process for BC Housing in identifying those who are vulnerable when you heat emergency response plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have housing and health teams that are often made up of nurses. So with some medical background, and when we identify the most vulnerable tenants in a building, they do it as a pod of people who work in that building. So that include our health and housing support, tenant support workers, building managers, and I can't remember if there's anybody else who is on the site and who actually knows the tenants. So our buildings are independent living, so we don't have access to people's health information or any details that we only have access to the information that people willingly share with us and are based on our relationship with them. And as I mentioned, like this year for the first time, we actually sent a survey and we asked, would you like to be contacted? So I think that also sort of was one way of self-selection, basically.
That's great. And that makes me think that it goes back to, community resilience. It is neighbors helping neighbors and people who know each other. And, these are private residents, but we get to know each other. We know when people need a little extra help when things get hot. Thank you very much, Magda. Really appreciate it.
Welcome. Thank you.
Big round of applause for Magda. Okay, next we have up one of my favorite people. It's Lisa Slager. She is Senior Policy Analyst at the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, Disaster Risk Management Division. Lisa supports collaboration and relationship building with various partners as we seek to collectively reduce our disaster and climate risks across BC. She also works on various initiatives to better our understanding on how these risks are shaped by climate change, including the development of provincial and regional risk assessments that look at a wide range of hazards, including flooding, as well as areas of resilience that are worth emphasizing. So without further ado, Lisa.
Thank you, Drew. Let me pull up my presentation. All right. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Wonderful. Well, thank you. As Drew said, my name is Lisa. I couldn't figure out the raise hand function earlier, so I'll actually say Tanche. Lisa, if I'm remembering correctly, was Dishanakashan, or hopefully I got that right. But
pretty good,
lovely,
Lisa, pretty good.
Lovely to see some familiar faces and some new ones as well. Yeah, I'm calling in from the Lekwungen speaking peoples, the territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and what is often called Victoria, BC. So yeah, happy to join everyone today and talk about extreme heat. I'll try to keep it brief, something short and sweet, and I really just wanted to share some beautiful photos while I talk about some of the work that we're doing. So yeah, essentially at our Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, as Drew mentioned, we're doing a lot of different initiatives, but essentially some of the big ones we're working on is really trying to understand the risks that we face across the province. And so this graphic here was actually done by an artist, Erica Bata, at the Indigenous Climate Resilience Forum back in February. So we did a couple of workshops, and this kind of helped capture the dialogue on some of the work that we're doing, but also hearing a lot from Indigenous folks on what is really important for the province in this work. And so, yeah, this graphic here really speaks to our push to better understand the risks that we face. So we talk about extreme heat, and we talk about experiences like the heat dome. It's fresh on, I think, many folks' mind. But what does that look like? We can see kind of what it looks like now, but really what does it also look like in the future? And then what are the impacts that has on the things that we actually care about? So this sort of, again, captured some of that dialogue. So one of the projects we're working on is a provincial level risk and resilience assessment. We're looking at extreme heat as a type of risk, similar to things like flooding or earthquake, but also really looking at the impact climate change has on that, and not just the risks, but also like our resilience. Where are areas that we can strengthen and enhance as we try to mitigate risk events and extreme heat? And so, yeah, I'll just like point out some things and conversations that came up. There was a lot of talk about key drivers, how climate change impacts our health and our safety. Again, a lot of talk on the emphasis of resilience. So, recovering, being able to recover from extreme heat, transform and accommodate the spaces that we live in. So we heard a lot of that from our other beautiful speakers today, Magda and Amy, how we can even make small accommodations in our home or our communities and the connections we have to sort of emphasize that resilience as we deal with extreme heat. Lots about upholding local and indigenous knowledge. So yeah, Magda spoke about this as well, is like indigenous folks have been managing risks for generations now. And so really there's a lot of like knowledge in those systems. Yeah, we also on the right, there's like a little flower, and a lot of conversations are being talked about traditionally the way the province and government has approached risk assessments is to look solely on like things like buildings and economy and critical infrastructure. But now we want to broaden that and actually really focus on the things that we care about in addition to that. So health and well-being, our connections as communities, the impacts on things like culture, but also the environment. So not just people, but like the lands and other relatives, living relatives that events impact. And so Drew also spoke a little bit about dogs, but just like the other living beings around us that we actually care about protecting. And so yeah, a lot of our work is really just figuring out what this sort of looks like now and into the future as we come into face with climate change, to really understand what we're doing. And a huge part of that is also so that the province knows what to invest in and what to protect, and where our priority actions are. So what do we care the most about protecting, and how do we go about and doing that? So that's a big shift in like the work that we're doing. This is also done by Erica at the same event. And I mentioned that we are looking at strengths as well, and not just things that are wrong or deficits, but areas that we like to enhance. And so this graphic here speaks a little bit about that. So it talks about things like starting with the land and food security and access to elders and traditional knowledge and sharing with one another, being stewards of the land, centering people. So a lot of what's been echoed already today. And so yeah, how do we go about emphasizing those resiliences and investing in them and protecting them? And lastly, another graphic done by a different artist. This one was by Kristen Elko. This was from an in-person workshop that we did in March at Gathering Our Voices with Indigenous youth. And so we were really lucky. Erica came with us in person and like threw this big white paper up on the wall, and we spoke to youth and kind of walked through this idea of this canoe analogy being like us on this journey towards like a resilient future. So a lot of this is the youth's voices on what they see in this work. And so on the left, you can see that's sort of representing where the youth currently are and the strengths in their communities and the things that they think are important, worth emphasizing. So they talk a lot about family and community services, clam gardens, protecting clam gardens, especially when it comes to extreme heat, evacuation plans, and preparedness. In the middle, they kind of talked a little bit about some anticipated challenges they saw in getting us to this ideal future. So some of what talked about rurality, the distance of communities and distance from one another, as well as the costs of doing a lot of this work together. And then the right is really just the destination they want to end and really what the future they kind of imagine. And so they talk about things like good water and better infrastructure, so roads and connections in their communities and safety. And yeah, you can see there's like one, they mentioned community spaces to keep cool. So when things are really hot, having those in their communities. So yeah, just some highlights from some of the youth visions. And with that, yeah, we're working on a lot of these like big strategic plans that are very high level. But before we close, Magda shared these, and Amy has a lot of good resources too. So I don't want to go too much into it. They covered a lot of it, but just emphasizing our ministry also does the Prepared BC resources. So this is our emergency preparedness education program. So there's lots of tools on there. There's guides, there's tips on how to keep cool. I even like if we're talking about community connections, there's like a neighborhood guide. And so it's a good place to start in building those community connections with one another as well. And so, yeah, tons of resources there. So I'll just throw that out there as just another tool to add to everyone's kit. And I think with that, I'll conclude. I can throw some of these emails in the chat as well, but if anyone ever wants to like reach out and talk about, you know, either personal preparedness or community preparedness, we can do that. And if anyone's really interested in some of those like high level provincial plans that we're doing, happy to chat about that too. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate that. So this is just about MNBC's resources. I mean, there's a lot of, there's a lot of tricky information there. So, there's a 24-hour crisis line and mental health navigator supports. So, you can reach out if you're ever having any difficulty with these types of issues. Next slide, please. And then just a reminder, this is all part of seasonal readiness webinars that happen monthly with EMCR, Emergency Management, Climate Readiness, BC, and MNBC. The next one is, I think it's going to be very, very interesting. It's on mental health and climate change. I think that a lot of people have worries and stresses about it, and I think it is affecting people's mental health, and there's a lot of good new research coming out about it. So there's David Hutton was going to be speaking to it. He's the Director of Provincial Psychosocial Services through Health Emergency Management BC, and he has an incredible CV, lots of work internationally and lots of work within the Public Health Agency of Canada. So please show up for that if you can. Everyone, thank you very much, Maarsii, and we'll see you next time for the Mental Health and Climate Change webinar. Thank you. Bye.